Hey everyone, it's Kelly Wong here. So we've got something a little different for you this week. As you probably know, if you're listening to this, at the end of this season, the Royal George will close its doors as we prepare to build a new home in its place. In today's episode, we're going to take a look back. We're going to look back at the George, and how it came to be, the stories that it's held, and what's coming next. Before we begin, I want to say a couple thank yous. Thank you to Cosette Derome, who did a brilliant job of writing the episode that you're about to hear. Thank you to Barclay, who wonderfully brought her words to life. And thank you to Melissa Novecosky for her thoughtful contributions. Lastly, but not leastly, thank you to everyone who reached out to me and contributed their memories of their time in the Royal George. We received a tremendous outpouring of memories, and it just solidified how much this building, how much this theater, how much it means to everyone. For me, I when I first started here, my first season was spent entirely at the George. The George is where I learned what it was like to be a member of the Shaw Company. Since then, I've had the privilege of being able to perform on that stage numerous times. It's where I cut my teeth. It's where I learned my craft. It's where I got the chance to play leading roles for the first time. And it is where the friendships that are nearest and dearest to me, it's where those friendships began. So, yeah, I'm going to miss it. But I'm also excited for what's coming next, and excited for the next chapter in what the Royal George will be. So, with that, here's our episode. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, I'm Peter Krantz. I was in the acting company for 28 seasons between 1981 and 2015.
My name is Amy Jewell, and I've been a member of the stage management team for 26 seasons.
My name is Anthony Buchanan. I was an actor at the Shaw from 1993 to 2013.
Hi, my name is Glenys
My
Ray.
name is Patrick Gallagher.
Hello, my name is Laura.
Hi, my name is Wendy Gilmore.
Hi, Julia Corson. My name is Mary.
Kevin Lamar.
Hi there.
Hi, my name is Rams.
I'm Jonathan Tad.
Hi there.
My name is
Wendy Smith.
I'm Neil Barclay, and I joined the Shaw Festival Ensemble in 1990. The Royal George has always been more than just a building. What gives it life are the people, the actors, the crew, the designers, and of course the audiences, who return year after year bringing their own stories with them. If you stand at 85 Queen Street in Niagara-on-the-Lake today, it's hard to imagine. But behind the polished facade of the Royal George Theatre, this jewel box of an Edwardian opera house, lies a story that's anything but delicate. Over the years, it's been called many things. The most up-to-date amusement hall in Ontario, a white elephant that nobody wanted, and eventually a gem. It's been a vaudeville stage, a silent movie house, even a school for mime. And today, it is one of the beating hearts of the Shaw Festival. But how did it get here? How does a building go from near ruin to cultural landmark? That's the story we're about to tell. So, let's start at the start. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine Niagara-on-the-Lake over a century ago. The clip-clop of horses, children chasing each other on the dusty streets, a church bell tolling from down the road. And at 85 Queen Street, long before it was ever a theater, a blacksmith shop. Smoke and heat drifting out onto the street. Prior to 1915, this was where you'd come to get your horse reshod, or well, honestly, I don't know what else a blacksmith would have done for you at the time. I can't imagine there was a high demand for swords or metal armor in the early 1900s. Either way, there was a searing hot forge, hammers clanging away on irons, horses shifting impatiently in the heat as they waited their turn. Imagine the smell. Canada, barely out of diapers, had just entered the First World War in the spring of 1914. Practically overnight, Camp Niagara sprang up just down the street on a plot of land now referred to as the Commons. Hundreds of young soldiers trained all day under the sun, and when training was done, they needed somewhere to go, somewhere loud, lively, distracting. Enter Mrs. M.N. Norris. She was an entrepreneur from Bay City, Michigan, already in town making photo plays, when she decided that she wanted to build something better to entertain the masses. A proper moving picture house with a stage for touring vaudeville acts that happened to swing through town. She built it fast, cheap but sturdy. The building was only meant to last maybe 20, 25 years. Structural steel with hollow clay speed tile as infill. Cheap Spanish stucco on the outside with a bit of siding on the front for show. 400 seats, dressing rooms under the stage, 2 projectors up above the balcony, and most important of all, big windows along the sides so it wouldn't get too stifling in the summer. Again, imagine the smell. It was called the Kitchener, after Lord Kitchener, the Boer War hero, whose steady gaze and pointing finger had become indelibly burned into the consciousness of the British and Canadian populations during the First World War, as he glared out from posters and thundered, "Your country needs you." For 10 cents a head, war tax included, you could settle in at the Kitchener for a silent film or a touring vaudeville act. For a while, the Kitchener thrived, but as the Great War ran its course, so too did the entertainment halls and the influx of bored young men with money to spend. By 1919, the theater was being labeled a white elephant. Mrs. Norris cut her losses and sold the building to a prominent artist and educator named George Reed, who renamed it the Royal George, not after himself, as some wags sniped, but after the reigning monarch, George V. And so, a legend was born. I'm kidding. A legend was not born. What Reed had on his hands was a fading vaudeville and silent picture house. Despite the new name, the theater never quite found its footing. But Niagara wasn't done with the George just yet.
Hello, I'm actor David Adams. I've been an intermittent ensemble member of the Shaw Festival over the years, and I have many wonderful memories of shows at the Royal George. While doing the Bernstein musical On the Town in 1992, we had a lengthy wait at some cafe tables while a scene happened in front of the curtain, and a young ASM had set up snacks for us to enjoy while we waited, which we lovingly dubbed Todd's Cafe. One matinee, Todd apologized that he'd totally forgotten snacks for that day. Well, I had a 20-minute break in the first act, so I volunteered to slip over to the then Value Mart to get some chips and cookies. In my show suit, I might add, but covered up with a long raincoat. While contemplating the chip aisle, a plummy voice behind me said, "Mr. Adams, don't you have a matinee?" It was artistic director Christopher Newton. I offered a sputtering, red-faced explanation. Of course, he demanded a very detailed one, smiled, and walked away.
Hello, my name is Corinne Coslow. I was performing in a brilliant Brian Friel play called The Faith Healer at the Royal George 2017. Jimmy Meason, Peter Krantz, myself, directed by Craig Hall, stage managed by the wonderful Meredith MacDonald. First preview, first 10 minutes, I went straight up. Tharn, I had no idea where I was in the piece. It was a 50-minute monologue. The character smoked fake cigarettes and drank a lot of fake whiskey, and I just went completely silent and probably smoked a whole cigarette and drank 2 glasses of whiskey. I thought that pause would be the end of my life. Somehow, I really can't imagine how, but I did. I found my way back and carried on to the end of the show. Hallelujah, we made it. First preview. I came out of the stage tour. The lovely Sean Wright was there. And he said, "Oh my God, what a wonderful play." And I have to say that remarkable pregnant pause where you sat on stage so confidently and smoked a whole cigarette and drank 2 glasses of whiskey. I've never seen anything like it.
In the 1940s, a local businessman named Dewey McCourt decided to give the building another shot. McCourt ran the town taxi service, but he took on the theater as a passion project, renaming it after Major General Sir Isaac Brock, the local hero of the War of 1812, who lost his life at the Battle of Queenston Heights, just down the Niagara Parkway from town. For a while, the place had life again. A new crowd of families and young soldiers filled the seats. Calvin Rand, who co-founded the Shaw Festival with Brian Doherty, recalls growing up in the area and the movies that played at the Brock.
Well, when I was very young, in the 30s, it was a derelict. It wasn't used at all. And then in the 40s and 50s, a man by the name of Dewey McCourt, who ran the taxi down here for a number of years, sort of renovated it and did movies. Mm-hmm. Ben-Hur, for example, we saw there, and movies like that.
Yeah. Ben-Hur on Queen Street. Imagine that chariot race thundering across the screen in little old Niagara-on-the-Lake. But McCourt's effort didn't last. By the 1960s, changing tastes and the ever-growing popularity of television meant that, once again, business was slipping at the Brock. For the next while, it got shuffled around between different owners and managers, getting even more run down as time marched on. Jack Coulard was the first treasurer of the Shaw Festival. At that time, he had also formed the Niagara Film Society and used the Brock Theatre to show foreign films.
McCourt would, when the film was over, would simply put it in a bag and leave it down on the front steps. There was never any danger in those days of anybody absconding with it. Mm-hmm. Things like that didn't happen in Niagara in those days.
It wasn't glamorous, but for a time, the Brock gave people access to world cinema, a cultural lifeline in a small town. It wasn't until 1972 that things began to turn around for Old 85 Queen. The building was bought, not by the Shaw Festival, mind you, but by a different Niagara-based company, the Canadian Mime Theatre. As it happens, Brian Doherty, founder of the Shaw Festival, brought Adrian Pecknold to Niagara-on-the-Lake. The group had been kicking around quietly for a few years. They were mimes, after all. The Canadian Mime Theatre bought the Brock, gave it back its old name, the Royal George Theatre, and got to work renovating the space. 3 years later, the Royal George boasted a control booth, offices, and a reception area on the second floor. The most notable addition was the brand spanking new neoclassical Palladian facade on the front of the building, designed by local architect Peter Stokes. It looked so good, it has barely changed to this day. Despite their glittering new home, the Canadian Mime Theatre fell prey to the trials and tribulations of many a small arts organization. It disbanded in 1977, although several members joined to form Theatre Beyond Words, a company that continued Brian Doherty's vision of a silent alternative to the decidedly talky works of George Bernard Shaw.
Hi, I'm Paul Sportelli, Shaw's music director. In my 27th season, I have a story from my 4th season. We were doing Merrily We Roll Along at the Royal George, and it's the end of Act 1. We're doing the Act 1 finale, and it goes like this. Right? And there's a little bit of a silence there. And what happens? Someone in the audience goes, in the silence, a great loud burp in the silence. And I watched all of the actors do everything they could to not break up laughing on stage. So of course, it's the talk of intermission, and we start Act 2, and in Act 2, there's a reprise of Not a Day Goes By, and very simple intro, chord, 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 chord. Wouldn't you know it, in the silence at the end of the intro, before people have to start singing, the burp comes back. And I once again watch all of my actor friends doing everything they possibly can to not crack up on stage.
Hi there, my name is Julie Martell. I'm an actor. My first season at the Shaw was in 2005. I have so many incredible memories from the Royal George stage, but one that I will not soon forget was being part of Sunday in the Park with George at the George. The musical is second to none. We did it acoustically. Our band was amazing. The harmonies in that show, and honestly, singing the finale Sunday, I was transported out of my body many times. But I will remember the times looking at our maestro, whether that be Sportelli with the baton or D'Souza with the baton, and seeing tears in their eyes.
In 1962, a group of ambitious theater makers had had an idea. A festival dedicated to one George Bernard Shaw. It began with a small band of enthusiasts making theater out of little more than creaky floors and folding chairs.
Well, it was called Salute to Shaw. The idea was they wanted to have a festival at the Courthouse Theater in Niagara-on-the-Lake.
That first season, Tim Devlin played the role of Eugene Marchbanks in Candida. They called it Salute to Shaw, and it was as scrappy as it sounds.
And that was constantly hammered into our head, that we got to get it right. We got to do, we got to do a super production. We can't have any more readings. And we had to prove it and prove ourselves. And subsequently, it would open the door for the festival the next year. And we were all absolutely thrilled when it worked and it was a success and was reviewed favorably everywhere. And we heard that the next year it was being established as an ongoing festival.
That determination worked. The festival survived its trial by fire, sometimes literally. The festival kicked off its first season with public readings of Don Juan in Hell from Shaw's Man and Superman, followed a month later by a fully staged production of Candida. Calvin Rand, the Shaw Festival's founding chair, recalls the challenges they faced on the opening night.
It was so unbearably hot that a lot of people just couldn't stand it. They went out. They raced out because there was no air conditioning. The windows they couldn't open. And to sit in there listening to Shaw for 3 hours or 2 hours was awful. I'll never forget it.
My goodness. Could you just imagine the smell?
And Dorothy Middleditch and I went around town getting fans, borrowing fans from the liquor store, other places to put up in that auditorium. It didn't help very much. It just circulated hot air. But it was horrible. And we all wonder why the Shaw Festival lasted after that first night. But people came back and it did cool off.
Somehow, despite the heat, despite the odds, Brian Doherty and Calvin Rand's Salute to Shaw succeeded. And the next season they renamed it the Shaw Festival. Those early years weren't glamorous. In fact, for some, they were downright discouraging.
And I remember going down during the run of the Canadian Players, we were still performing, just to visit Niagara, to look around, see what I'd got myself into, as it were. And I must say, I was very, very depressed.
That's Paxton Whitehead, the droll English actor who became the Shaw Festival's artistic director in 1967.
We met Brian Doherty, the founder, and he showed us the courthouse, which is a big mistake. Because, I mean, it looked impossible. And you thought, oh my God, what has one got oneself into? And the theatre, the courthouse, looked too small, impossible, no wing space. Where would you dress? How could this possibly be? And I was thinking, and I turned down Stratford for this.
For Paxton, Niagara-on-the-Lake was little more than a sleepy village with an insufficient courthouse stage.
For those that remember the town then, of course, it would be quite unrecognizable today, and it was really very, very small.
But what Paxton saw as a dead end, others would come to love as home. Jack Medley, an English actor who came to Canada for a vacation and ended up spending 17 seasons as a member of the acting ensemble, remembers what first drew him here.
I came because the town is so pretty, and I made a lot of friends here. I don't drive, and there are no taxis here. You have to manage on a bicycle, so it's ideal. And where I live now, well, where you live anywhere in town, if you're in the old part of town, it's not very far to any theatre.
For Jack, the town was small, simple, even quaint. The Shaw Festival changed the pace of life in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Artists like Jack came, stayed, and built their lives here. The town and the theatre company grew together, each shaping the other. In 1973, in the face of stiff resistance from the town, you may notice a bit of a theme as our story continues. The Shaw built the Festival Theatre out on the edge of the Commons. a major milestone for this scrappy startup. By the end of the decade, Christopher Newton had stepped in as artistic director. He believed the festival needed a second, more intimate stage, one that could host small-scale musicals that the big houses couldn't. Right around the same time, the Canadian Mime Theatre was struggling to stay afloat. They briefly rebranded themselves as Theatre Beyond Words, but even that didn't help. Eventually, they had no choice but to sell their Queen Street space. And when it went up for sale, the Shaw put in a bid. Jack Coulard, the first treasurer of the Shaw Festival, recounts a fateful board meeting in Toronto.
Close to the termination of the meeting, the woman who was the administrative director at the time said, "Tomorrow is the closing day for our purchase of the Brock Theatre, and I need $25,000 more dollars."
$25,000 overnight. Not a small request.
So Mackenzie said, "Well, you fellows heard that. I expect that you will get together and give me $25,000 as soon as we're finished here."
And right there, they reached for their checkbooks.
And sure enough, they did. At the end of the meeting, they all pulled out their checkbooks, and he handed the woman checks for $25,000. People really had their hearts in it.
And just like that, the Shaw Festival owned the Brock Theatre, the old Royal George. It wasn't bought by a single donor or a government bailout, but by a handful of people around a table, pulling out their checkbooks because they believed this festival mattered. So the festival finally had the Royal George. What the building lacked, though, was character and beauty. That transformation was about to begin.
Hi, I'm Sanjay Talwar, an actor with the Shaw Festival. My Royal George memory is the second time that Shaw did A Christmas Carol, I was cast as the ghost of Christmas Present. It also was the first time I put on a pair of roller skates in my life, and so I would try and practice as much as I could. The ghost makes his first appearance on roller skates at the top of Act 2, so at the intermissions, I would go up and put on the skates and try and skate around and not fall down. And during one of those intermissions, I went over a bump and my legs went straight forward. I went completely vertical and crashed down flat on my back on the stage and hoped that I didn't make too loud a sound. I was lying there closing my eyes, hoping that I could get up. And I opened my eyes to one of the crew members looking at me going, "Are you okay? I think you broke the theater."
Hi, Kevin Lamont, lighting design director, with a story about the Royal George from 1988. That was my first season here, and I was assisting Leslie Wilkinson, who was doing the lighting design for Hit the Deck. At the first preview for that show, we inadvertently had erased a show file for the show, somehow late that night from a dress rehearsal the night before. At any rate, in the morning we found this out. So we ended up reading with Kevin Clark, who was the electrician. We ended up reading the show back into Kevin as he typed as quickly as he could. So from the half hour before the show, we were able to read Act 1 in, and then at the intermission, we were able to read Act 2 back in. Quite a harrowing experience, and I'm happy to say I still have a job.
Owning the Royal George was one thing. Turning it into a theatre that reflected what the Shaw was becoming was another. And for that, artistic director Christopher Newton turned to someone who would leave an unforgettable mark on the company and on the George itself.
Well, my name is Karen Porteous, and I was brought out from Vancouver by Christopher Newton to be head of design for the Shaw Festival.
Cameron Porteous spent nearly 2 decades designing sets and costumes for the Shaw Festival, but what many people don't realize is that he was also the one in charge of turning the Royal George into the jewel box that we know and love. Newton's plan for the George was clear: keep it intimate and give it its own identity.
The whole idea was to turn it into doing the mini musicals. 2 piano musicals is what it was all about. Christopher refused to put musicals on the main stage. He says that's for the bigger productions, but mini musical is where the money will be. And he was absolutely right. It totally sold out. So the whole George at that point became mini musicals and murder mysteries.
But was the Royal George of 1980 the glimmering red curtain splendor we enjoy today? Absolutely not. It had the Palladian facade out front, yes, but inside was a severe dark room, trying its darndest to give an impression of the theater.
So when you went in, it was like getting inside a black box, just the seats and black walls. That's the way the mime company wanted it.
As you walk up to the theater, you see exactly what you see today. Nothing had changed.
Patty Parr worked alongside Cameron as the director of operations for the Royal George renovation project.
The whole facade, the false facade on the front of the Royal George Theatre, was done by the Canadian Mime Theatre. Coming in, all the walls painted black, a sort of a quasi-ticket booth over here. Certainly no etched glass with holes in them. That's Walter Carson's vision.
However you feel about the seats today, they're a far cry from what came before.
Horrible, crummy chairs. They were all floor mount chairs. Would be saving money and buy secondhand chairs from some arena and then just have the scene shop cut off the back legs. Well, all that did was create an extremely unsafe situation because the minute you sat down on those chairs, it would break the welds and you'd be sitting on the lap of the man behind you, which happened a lot, including at an opening night.
The George had its quirks. Rickety chairs, leaking walls, the odd bat swooping in during performances, and the ornate details on today's ceiling and walls were nowhere to be seen.
And there was no ceiling. It was wide open with lots of stuff hanging down and columns and duct work. So it was just bare bones. No orchestra pit, no proscenium arch, nothing.
Charming, right? But it gave the Shaw what it needed, more seats.
Christopher wanted to increase the capacity of the Shaw Festival. I said, in Quebec, they had built these tent theaters. You know, it sounds a bit like Stratford, but the completely different type of thing. I said, we could build a tent theater just on the Commons, and we could get over 300-400 seats easily in there.
They went to the board with the idea, and it got approved. People rallied behind it. Everyone was excited. Everyone, that is, except for the town.
We had this meeting, but my God, the town went ballistic. They just went nuts over the fact that we were going to build a tent theater on the Commons, etc., etc. And it got so nasty that the Board of Governors recommended that we pull the project, which we did.
So much for the tent.
My name is Shari Flett. It was 1994. We were playing The Busman's Honeymoon by Dorothy L. Sayers, a murder mystery with a stellar cast and sold-out houses. At the climax of the play, with a walloping storm waging outside the theatre, there was a crack of thunder, a strike of lightning, and suddenly the theatre was cast into darkness, a power outage in the region of Niagara-on-the-Lake. The audience wanted us to continue. After a short break, some quick thinking and masterly action from the crew, the stage was effectively lit with candlelight. We could be seen and heard. The play continued. The mystery was solved. The cast was relieved. The audience cheered. It was a delicious and unexpected adventure for everyone.
Hi, my name's Jay Turvey. I'm an actor, director, and writer at the Shaw Festival for the past 25 seasons. My story is from Happy End in 2003 at the George. I was playing a gangster, and I had a bit of a break in Act 2, and I thought I would go back out onto the courtyard. I could still hear the show through the speakers. Then it came time for me to think about making my entrance again. I went back and the stage door had been locked and I could not get in. I banged on the door. Nobody could hear me. I realized that everyone was on stage in the cast at that point. So I ran out onto the street thinking I'll have to come in through the front of the audience. And of course, there were people on the main street staring at me with a gun in my hand. So I turned back around, not wanting to frighten anybody, ran back to the stage door, banged on it like a baby until somebody from wardrobe finally let me in and rushed on stage just in time to deliver my first line.
So, no tent, no new theater, and a company still in need of space. The courthouse was charming, the festival theater was thriving, but the George was, well, the George. That's when help arrived from an unlikely philanthropist with an even unlikelier nickname. Enter Walter Care Bear Carson.
88 to 1990 was the Walter Care Bear Carson renovation. And that came about with the development department getting a donation from this philanthropist, Walter Carson. His vision was to turn the Black Box Theater, which is what the Royal George was when I started, and he wanted to turn it into an Edwardian opera house.
Christopher Newton, the festival's artistic director, saw great potential in what Care Bear was offering.
Christopher came to me and said, we're going to have to renovate the stage area, the fly tower, etc. His idea was that we make it a more of a pleasant place for people to come. And he said, do something along the lines of an Edwardian opera house. Now, I knew exactly what it meant because I worked in one in Wimbledon. The Wimbledon Theatre was an Edwardian opera house at one point. So I knew exactly what he was talking about.
So that's what they did. Over the course of 3 years, from the moment the season closed in October until the next season started in March, they worked around the clock to give the Royal George a much-needed facelift.
It was my project, and we'd deal with all the trades. Cameron's dealing with Walter Carson. He was really hands-on. He was absolutely wanting to approve every single detail. It was my project because when my predecessor left, then there I was. I have a funny story.
Patty's got a funny story.
First day of construction, in comes the crew. We're going to talk. The site supervisor, who was going to be my site supervisor for the following 2 years, said, "Where's Dave?" I said, "He doesn't work here anymore." He said, "Who's the new guy?" I said, "I'm the new guy." And he said, "Wow, a girl doing a man's job." And I said, "I'll forget you said that." And he went, "Sorry." So I'll never forget that. The girl did the man's job.
The dedication people put into every surface in the building was astonishing. What had been bare walls was transformed into marble and gold leaf. It wasn't enough to cover the black box. They wanted to conjure another world entirely.
Trying to do something from that particular period at a time when nobody's doing it. And that was where I discovered this company called Ballmer in Toronto. And they went back 100 years. Everything I needed was there. They were bringing molds out they hadn't used in 80, 90 years. One of the moldings that's on the panels on the walls of the Royal George is from the Timothy Eaton Estate House. The other thing was to do all the painting. It wasn't just a matter of painting things. There had to be gold leaf happen, marbling, etc. Well, we had the people at the Shaw, but I used the Shaw people to actually do the painting and finishing off the interior.
I was hugely proud of what our people did. I was proud of the fact that all of the faux marble on the proscenium arch, all the columns in the balcony were all hand-painted by scenic artists. Gwyneth Stark and Karen McCallum, they would work in the shop all day long. And at night, those girls were on scaffolding, working. They did this all, and you have no idea what it takes to do marbling. I mean, there's the base coat, etc., and then they start and they paint with turkey feathers. Literally, real turkey feathers to do all of the graining.
And that, dear listener, is how you turn a cheap, crumbling, clay-bricked picture house into an Edwardian jewel box of a theater. Plaster, paint, and turkey feathers. The Royal George renovation of 1988 to 1991 transports us to another time. Walter Care Bear Carson had grown up in Germany, where even modest town theaters shimmered with velvet, gilt, and painted ceilings. That memory of beauty stayed with him, and in Niagara, it found new life. So when we enter the George now, we're not just stepping into a theater. We're stepping into an echo of his boyhood wonder. Like many things in the theater, the gold and marble of the Royal George are completely fake. But the care, the detail, the love put into creating this space, that's as real as it gets.
My name is Alan Teichman, and I've been working at Shaw in a range of positions since 1987. One of the most wonderful things about working in an older theater is experiencing what one might call the dramatic patina of the space. In essence, it's the history of all the work done there written in the fabric and the feeling of the building. All the shows that have gone on in there, all the people who have worked in there, and all the nicks and bumps and scratches that the theater now bears through its long use. It's palpable, it's unmissable, and there's a kind of magic in it. When it's your turn to work in that theater, it's always exciting to know that what you're doing in that moment is adding to the story that the building tells, and that it will be apparent to everyone who then follows you. For me, that's going to be one of the things that I miss most with the loss of the Royal George as we know it now. The patina will renew itself over the decades, but the layers that I and so many others were part of won't be just more burners through use. They won't be there anymore. People will tell stories, of course, but the best and most honest version of the story is always the one recorded in the building itself.
Hi, this is Martin Happer. I've been an actor at Shaw for 20 seasons. In 2008, I was roommates with actor Gray Powell, and in an effort to entertain the company, we wrote a rap song called Learn It All and shot a video for it. We screened it at one of the Snags, which are the company cabarets we have in the Royal George Bar. The video concludes with the two of us in the Royal George Bar, rapping the final verse while bobbing our heads like Muppets along the one long wall that's decorated by framed Shaw Festival production photos. These were shots from the earliest days of the festival to recent years, featuring legends of the Shaw stage, many of whom have now passed. Artists like Christopher Newton, Goldie Semple, David Sherman, and Jenny Phipps, whose glamorous headshot you couldn't keep your eyes off. It's a silly video, but it pleases me because now it feels like a tribute to the giants who tread the boards of the Shaw Festival, and in its simplistic way is a sort of time capsule for the history of the Royal George and all that has taken place in its basement bar, all the stories, the songs, the laughter, the cheers, the tears, the intoxicating and intoxicated life that that bar has hosted.
I love performing in the George. I've done so many shows there, from the first one, Connecticut Yankee in 1991, where I played an Arthurian knight, a sea monster, and Carmen Miranda, to The Mystery of Edwin Drood, where I played the chairman and had to corral the audience in an improvised musical, to Terence Rattigan's After the Dance, and most recently, The Shadow of a Doubt in 2023. It is a space where challenges somehow turn into cherished memories. As intimate and cozy as it seems from the audience, that's nothing compared to how intimate and cozy it is backstage. I can remember in Neil Monroe's production of The Invisible Man, there were three of us crammed in the tiny stage-right alcove, waiting to make an entrance through the Juliet door, and inevitably, at the last moment, someone, I won't mention who, would pass gas, and we would stumble out on stage gasping. Dorothy L. Sayers' murder mystery, Busman's Honeymoon, that production was memorable for one of the most extraordinary moments of corpsing I've ever experienced. Almost the entire cast was on stage being confronted by the inspector about the missing owner of the house. This was a cast of veterans who collectively probably had 500 years or more of stage experience. Jenny Phipps, Jack Medley, Shari Flett, Mary Haney, and the venerable senior actor of the company, Tony Van Bridge, then approaching 80. At a moment of great tension, we were meant to hear a blood-curdling scream from off stage as Jenny Phipps's housekeeper, Mrs. Ruddle, discovered the body, and Anthony Buchan's butler came running on stage to tell us what they'd found. Only one day, Jenny's blood-curdling scream turned more towards alpine yodeling. Our eyes widened as we looked at each other, thinking, what was that? But it was the sight of Anthony running on, his blue eyes blazing, and a grin a mile wide which set us all off. We all lost it. Even the rock-solid Tony Van Bridge, I remember seeing tears pouring down his cheeks. All except our unflappable leader, the dear late David Sherman, as Lord Peter Wimsey, who was remarkably disciplined. And all through intermission, he sat at his usual spot playing bridge with the crew, and ever so gently tisk-tisking us under his breath. I think of the George less as a building and more of a community. It's where we bump into each other in the wings, laugh until we cry, and build 1,000 little rituals only we understand. And it's that same spirit that gave rise to one of its most cherished traditions, a tradition that happens in the basement bar on Saturday nights.
Yeah, when Saturday Night at the George was created, Christopher wanted a place where the actors could come after work.
Cameron Porteous was here during the inception of the Snags.
You know, they said people go to the Prince of Wales to have a drink or two before dinner, before going home to bed or something. The actors don't get that opportunity till after about 11 o'clock. So where can they go and have a drink and, relax, etc.? So that's how the bar started.
The first time I walked inside the George was in 1985, just before I started theater school. We had been down early in the summer and seen Christopher Newton's legendary production of Heartbreak House, and I'd found it so funny and so exciting that I nagged my mom to go back for a return visit at the end of August. I'd just been accepted in the acting program at the National Theatre School, and I knew that one of the perks at NTS was getting to go on a trip to Shaw and Stratford every summer just before the fall term began. I saw gaggles of young students prowling Queen Street dressed in bohemian black, and I figured, those must be the NTS kids. So I introduced myself, and I fell in with them for the next few days. And one of the things they tipped me off about was a raucous Saturday night cabaret in the basement of the Royal George Theatre, where apparently the company members let their hair down. It was called Saturday Night at the George, or SNAG for short. The energy emanating from that cramped basement was electric.
It's Saturday night at the George.
Niagara-on-the-Lake was quieter then, especially by 11:30 p.m. And as you approached the George, you could hear the roar from inside growing louder. Opening the main doors, it broke out into a mad cacophonous din, and walking down that perilously windy staircase, you really did feel like you were entering a Paris bar in the 1920s, or maybe more like a Chicago speakeasy during Prohibition. On stage, you saw a bill of fare that ran the gamut of styles from A to Z: songs, dances, poetry, sketches, performance art. It was a concert, a poetry reading, an improv sketch show, and occasionally a little burlesque. The creativity was endless. And it wasn't only the actors who got up on that stage. Every department was represented. One of the perennial acts in the Stag was the crew doing a Monty Python sketch, usually the luxury sketch. That one was particularly popular. I remember the towering and elegant actor Bob Benson doing a sort of poem that I think might have been called Mushroom Hunting. All I remember is that it went on forever, and Benson was oblivious to the growing cries of "Enough!" and "Get off the stage!" He reveled in his transgression. Even though there were scads of young actors in their 20s in the company to fill out a set list, sometimes it would be the oldest actors who would do the most outlandish acts. One of the most memorable was a diminutive actress, then in her 60s, named Irene Hogan, who was barely 5 feet tall, with a long mane of snow-white hair, usually outfitted in large dark sunglasses, a snug blouse, and a pair of very short shorts. An audience member would have just come out of Major Barbara, seeing her clad in rags as Rummy Mitchins, and witnessed this tornado of mad English glamour, reciting some bizarre poem by Edith Sitwell or a story by Ronald Furbank. The rank and file weren't the only ones who got up to mischief. Even the artistic directors, Christopher Newton, Jackie Maxwell, Tim Carroll, all stepped onto that tiny stage at one point or another. For a few minutes, the hierarchy disappeared. The George definitely felt like our club, and we went there most nights after the shows, not just on Saturdays when there was a snag. And it was not exclusive. Many folks not associated with the theater knew it was a place where a good time would definitely be had by all.
At first, it was just homegrown entertainment for us, but then the word got out. And I can tell you there were times down there in the Royal George Bar when the staircase was filled with people sitting on the stairs all the way up, and most of them had come in from Toronto to see the show. The word had got out about Saturday Night at the George. There was a highlight one night I was there. Prime Minister John Turner showed up to see a show at the Shaw Festival and came to Saturday Night at the George. So this was it. The Prime Minister of Canada is here. He then gets up on the stage and does an a cappella version of the Halifax Pier. I couldn't believe what was going on at this time. But that was the George. You never knew what was going to happen.
The sitting Prime Minister crooning in the George basement, the kind of night people would talk about for years. The guest list could be surprising. In recent memory, even the likes of Mark Rylance and Stephen Fry found themselves swept into the madness. Jeff Irving presiding like a late-night host, Peter Millard's Professor Had the Half in his ridiculous prop comedy, Kelly Wong blowing minds with his magic, Tom Marriott thundering out a poem with a blunt dismissal of the Stratford cricket team, Cal Galemba and Billy Lake glammed up in drag, and Martin Happer proving that yes, the George could handle rap. Over the decades, snags have grown and evolved. There's the drag snag, where sexuality and gender become malleable and folks are free to celebrate their queerness. There's the cricket snag, to rally the troops before the annual match. The spirit of the snags will surely continue, even as the building is reborn, ghosts and all.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Thayer, and my first season at the Shaw Festival, I got to do a play at the Royal George called After the Dance by Terence Rattigan, and Christopher Newton directed it. And his idea was that as this couple that was essentially, their marriage was over and they were realizing this, they were playing out this scene, there was a party going on in the room beside them. And so periodically there would be, bouts of laughter and tittering and stuff. And so there was, I don't know, like maybe 12 of us packed back there on stage left. And there was, like all these different sets from the different shows that were rotating in the George as well. So it was very tight. And we were all squished and we're all waiting for the specific points to laugh and titter. So it was a very quiet scene on stage because, it's tragic. And of course, during one of the silences, the late and wonderful Jenny Phipps's cell phone went off. And instead of just turning it off, she ran to the exit and hucked her phone as far away from her person as she could. And anyway, after that, all the laughter was perhaps not adhering to the cues.
My name's Lee. I've been a part of the stage management team with the Shaw Festival for 17 seasons. My favorite George memory is a day we were doing a matinee of French Without Tears and a bat decided to make its way out of the rafters of the George. So before the show, we're all standing around with towels, some in the balcony, some on stage, desperately trying to catch this bat, but we were unsuccessful. So during the performance, it was swooping around everywhere. Julie Martell and Robin Evan Willis were on stage, desperately trying to keep it together, and they did a very good job. At intermission, finally, we got the bat out through the doors that opened for the audience. Years later, at a matinee of Gaslight, Billy Lake, who had been in that show of French Without Tears, was in the audience with his partner, and he was telling the story of the bat. And lo and behold, that very day in Gaslight, another Julie Lumsden, ended up with a bat swooping around her head as if it had been conjured by the memory.
So, I'm Michelle Gadula, and I've been at the Shaw since 97. I was in upper wardrobe for 8 seasons and then went to backstage wardrobe running since then.
Aside from being a part of the wardrobe department, Michelle is also a keeper of some of the spookier knowledge about the Royal George.
The George is an amazing space, it holds a lot of history, and you may encounter some experiences with the ghost of Nancy Kerr. She may pop up in the balcony. You may see her in the balcony. She is known to be in the green room.
Nancy Kerr is probably the Royal George's most well-known ghost. She was an actor with the festival through the 1980s. I didn't know her well, though we were meant to share the stage once. I can still remember her being wheeled into the rehearsal hall for the first reading of Lulu in 1991. Elegant, radiant, even as illness had taken its toll. She passed away not long after, but her presence, her spark, has lingered with so many of us, both in memory and, some say, in the theater itself.
There was a wigs person. She said, I was doing wigs. I was working on wigs, and I turned around, and this woman was standing in the door. And she said, what do you want? She walked out of the room, and she pointed up on the wall, and it was the photo of Nancy Kerr.
Nancy is often spotted up in the balcony when the theater is empty. One evening, when getting ready for a show, a crew member looked up to see a figure watching her.
She's doing presets on stage, and the theater's quiet. She looks up, and she can see her sitting in the balcony.
Others have felt a cold breath on the back of the neck, or even felt a touch when no one was there.
As one of our wardrobe women was doing presets before a show, she was walking on stage, and she felt a hand come out and grab her ankle.
During a matinee of Peter and the Starcatcher, while preparing for a post-show chat downstairs in the bar, a member of the education department sets up 2 bottles of water on some chairs. As she walks towards the light switch behind her, a single loud thwap. She turns. One of the bottles had been tossed several meters away from the chair. No one downstairs. No way it rolled that far. It's one thing when you experience something like this on your own. You might think your eyes are playing tricks on you, but it's another when you're in the company of others.
There's 2 wardrobe people at the end of a show call, and this particular night, both wardrobe attendants were a little later in their call than usual. Both women come around the corner out of the wardrobe room to walk towards the sink when both are stopped in their tracks. And a man in dark clothes walks out of dressing room 2 towards them, stops at the sink, looks up, notices them, and 2 seconds later is walking back into dressing room 2.
That male ghost at the George is believed to be that of lighting designer Jeffrey Dallas, who passed away in 1989. Dallas is the one usually credited when the lights go funny, or when, as mentioned, a strange man is seen. Years ago, a staffer shows up to her shift early. She steps into a bathroom stall to change into her uniform. As far as she knows, she was alone downstairs. She hears the bathroom door open and footsteps walk across the room. The hinges of the stall next to her creak open, then closed. "Hello?" she asks. No answer. She finishes changing and steps out. When she peeks under the stall door, no feet. She gently nudges it, and the door violently slams open. No one was there. Actor Travis Cito swears that one night when nerves nearly got the better of him, something or someone gave him no choice but to walk on stage.
My scene was right at the very end, and all I had to do was burst on stage, say a few lines, and leave again. But we got to opening night, and I was backstage looking at the door to enter, and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with stage fright or something, or the idea of actually walking out and talking was so scary I couldn't do it. And I started looking around like, where's the fire alarm? I could pull it and I wouldn't have to do this. I'm too scared. And then before I knew it, I felt this push on my hip. And Then I was through the door, on stage, said my lines, left again. At first, I think I might have been unnerved, but one of our amazing dressers, Pam Gallup, told me about some of the ghosts that she's seen working as a dresser in the George. And she said it had been so many different kinds of theaters over such a long period of time that the ghosts here are like working actor ghosts. And when I thought about it like that, I was so comforted that an actor from another time had my back.
I was thinking to myself, why theaters? You know, when you think of all the stories of like theaters in England that are so inhabited with spirits, why theaters? There's so much emotion that is released on stage that those spaces house a lot of emotions and feelings. And that's why the theory is that there's so much ghost activity in a theater.
We may never know the true reason for supernatural visitations at the George, but maybe we don't need to. The theater is lucky to have friendly, if somewhat mischievous, spirits floating about. Maybe they just want to make sure everyone's doing a good job keeping the place running.
I'm Ryan D'Souza, and I'm the Associate Music Director at the Shaw Festival. So one of my favorite memories from the George is from 2004. We were doing Pal Joey, and the show began with the overture, and there were two performers on stage. Sam Strassfeld, who was an actor in the company and was playing the bartender, bar hop, and myself on the piano as the piano player at the club. I had an antique upright piano, and they gave me this antique piano bench. Now, a 225-pound musician should probably not be playing piano solos where you have to lean to the right and run down the piano like that. I go to play my solo, and the next thing I know, I'm lying on the floor looking at the piano going, wow, I've never seen the piano from this angle. Apparently the bench had smashed as I went to lean. After the show, I walk out the stage door, and Mary Haney is there. And she says, wow, how do you guys do the exploding piano bench? It was amazing.
Hi, my name is Claire Julian, and I was an actor at the Shaw Festival for 16 seasons. I was at the theater one afternoon getting ready for the show. It had been raining steadily that whole day. I was getting my makeup on, getting my wig on. I didn't have my costume on yet. Unfortunately, I did not have my show shoes on either, because when I looked down at the floor, I saw water rising up through the carpet. I grabbed my belongings and ran out of the room into the green room shouting, my dressing room's flooding, the Royal George is flooding. Like I was Chicken Little, the sky is falling, my dressing room's flooding.
The foundation is, as I say, made of clay, and it's dissolved, and so every time it rains or we get snow melt, water pours through the walls and makes it very dangerous to work in the building. So we've lost lots of performances this last couple of years to it.
Tim Jennings, the Shaw's executive director, is leading a city TV crew through the building's problem spots. As he talks, the camera lingers on the theater's walls. Clay and plaster that once held firm, now crumbling like old parchment.
This alley, all the way to the back, in the winter, in the summer, in the rain, in the snow. You can imagine that we're not very happy about this. There are washrooms in the building, but they're down a spiral staircase, so if you have mobility challenges, that is your best access washroom.
We've known for decades that the George was running on borrowed time. When Tim Jennings arrived in 2015, he found a report on his desk saying that the theater had reached the end of its life, and that report was already 10 years old.
You can't continue to watch the weather report and know the rain is coming and know what's going to happen to your building. It's just demoralizing for everybody.
Patty remembers bailing out water back in the 90s. Proof that these floods aren't just a recent problem, but something the George has been battling for decades.
The rain is coming, so torrential, it's coming in through the doors, house left, house right. It's rolling down the rake floor, going into the orchestra pit and flooding the entire dressing room area. You have stage crews pulling everything out of the orchestra pit, including the piano, up onto the deck of the stage. first 3-4 rows are knee deep in water. Nobody knows these things. Nobody knows. You'd be hard pressed to find too many facilities people who aren't saying, yes.
Part of the problem is what the building's made of. The George was built out of something called speed tile. It sounds sturdy, but really it's just baked clay. Back when the building was first erected, they figured it might last for 25 years, which means that by the end of the Second World War, the George was technically past its expiry date. Everything since then has been borrowed time. Over the years, the Shaw has poured millions into keeping it alive. In the early aughts, they even added metal girders inside and out just to keep the walls from falling down. And every time it rains, the basement floods. The same basement that holds the lobby bar, the bathrooms, dressing rooms, props, wigs, wardrobe, and the oh-so-luxurious green room. And then this past January came the biggest flood of all. As a cold snap hit, the foundation walls failed, and a water main burst in the front lobby. Hundreds of thousands of liters of water poured into the foyer and cascaded down into the basement. But water is only part of the problem. Accessibility is another. When we think about a Royal George for the next 100 years, accessibility is at the heart of it. The vision is to make the new George one of the most accessible theaters in North America. And the Shaw is aiming for the gold standard, the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification. For context, if you were to build a brand new building to today's code, it would only score 42% on their scale. Gold means 80% or higher. That's a huge leap. And it's not just about audiences. Backstage at the George is just as tight and inaccessible as the front of house. Most of the technical areas require you to crouch or crawl. Ladders are the only way up to many of the spaces. In the new Royal George, staff with mobility devices will be able to access every single part of the building. That's never been possible before. The new theater will be a place where everyone, artists, crew, and audiences alike, can do their work or enjoy the show no matter their level of mobility. And if it works, it won't be just a first for the Shaw or for Niagara-on-the-Lake. It'll be the first theater in North America to do it. Which, for a building once held together with clay tiles and duct tape, isn't a bad upgrade.
Hi, this is Rick Reed. My first time on the Royal George stage was a bit of an event. I was an emergency replacement, and that I had one day to learn 2 roles and 2 accents and get my wardrobe all sorted to make my debut. I'd never even been inside the Royal George Theatre as an audience member, backstage on the performance side of the stage. I hadn't seen the show, and I had never even introduced myself to the rest of the cast. But I had 3 fabulous crew members backstage, Archie, Kevin, and Katie, who took such good care of me. Katie took care of the wardrobe and my quick changes, and Kevin and Archie would pass me back and forth between the 2 of them to make sure that I was at the right place to make my entrance, and I was standing at the right door, and Archie would open the door, and I'd step through, he'd close the door, I'd do as part of a scene, and the door would open, and I'd exit, Kevin would close the door behind me, and that's how we did the show the whole evening. It was a nerve-wracking event, I'll tell you that.
My name is Jenny Wright, and I started at the Shaw Festival in 1996. And my story is from the year 2000. I had my very first big dramatic role in a J.B. Priestley play directed by the late, great Neil Monroe on the Royal George stage. And this piece called Time in the Conways was about time travel and our future selves. And at the end of Act 2 in a 3-act play, I was alone on stage, basically having a breakdown. It was light a cigarette, have a drink, hands shaking, turn up stage, and then turn to the audience and break down and curtain. Well, one night, as I was doing my moment all by myself, my big dramatic moment, I turned up stage and there was an archway upstage in which we could exit left or right. And I saw a shadow passing from the left, and I thought, why the hell is my scene partner that just left coming back on stage? It wasn't my scene partner. It was two drunk guys that walked into the theater off Queen Street, and they passed through that archway from left to right as I just stood watching, and they turned and went, "Oh, sorry," and kept going. My friend Jane Johansson was out in the audience watching, and she said, "Oh my God, I thought it was a Neil Monroe cool touch of that maybe it was your future grandsons from the future." No, it was two drunk guys who interrupted one of my biggest moments that I ever had on a Shaw Festival stage.
The push for a new Royal George didn't start yesterday. The fragility of the foundation, the tight quarters backstage, and the even tighter quarters for our audiences have been a topic of conversation for many years. The first serious designs began back in 2017 with hopes to rebuild by 2021, but then the pandemic arrived and everything stalled. Meanwhile, the problems we've already talked about, the leaks, the floods, the crumbling foundations, they didn't stop. They got worse. When the plans came back to life, so did the conversations in town. At one council meeting this past summer, the chamber was so full that people were asked to move into overflow rooms. The Shaw Festival has always experienced a bit of push and pull with the town. From the building of the Festival Theatre to abortive plans for tents on the Commons, new plans have been viewed with suspicion by a town which, understandably, is proud of its history and how it looks. That tension is part of the George's story, as much as vaudeville and murder mysteries. This time, though, the conversation isn't just about a failing building, but imagining something larger. The new George is part of the most ambitious project in the Shaw's history. All Together Now, a campaign to transform the festival into a campus of connection, creativity, and curiosity. The idea is simple but powerful. Create spaces where people can come together, look each other in the eye, share stories, even disagree, and still be friends. Alongside the new George, this campaign includes the Shaw Artists Village and the Burton Center for Lifelong Creativity, places designed for learning, gathering, and sparking imagination. At its heart, it's about real human connection in an age when our devices pull us in the other direction. On April 1st of this year came the game changer. The province announced a historic $35 million investment with a 3-year timeline to complete the project. That was the green light. So, what happens next? The very last show in the Old George will be A Christmas Carol this December. The final performance will be on December 21st. The event will be bittersweet, knowing it's the final bow for this version of the George. As soon as the curtain falls, crews will begin carefully removing everything that can be saved. The lights, the mirrors, the furniture, pieces of the Old George that will be carried forward into the new. Then in the new year, demolition will begin, and work on a new foundation will finally start, one strong enough to carry the theatre into its second century. From the street, the front of the new George will look like a ghostly version of the old one. But inside, it will be completely different. A lobby that welcomes everyone, rehearsal spaces for artists, an auditorium where every seat is accessible, backstage areas where every worker can do their job with dignity and ease. It will take lots of hard work, but construction is scheduled to finish in late 2028, just in time for a holiday show. And when the doors open, some of those salvaged pieces of the Old George will find their place again, reminders of where we've come from, woven into the fabric of what's new. What would Mrs. Norris, who built this vaudeville house in 1915, have thought of plays like an octoroon, or the madness of George III? What would those soldiers have made of Oh, What a Lovely War, the ferociously anti-war musical that lays bare the cost of the very conflict they were about to fight? In Brideshead Revisited, Yves Lenoir writes of the country estate, "The builders did not know the uses to which their work would descend. They made a new house with the stones of the old castle. Year by year, generation after generation, they enriched and extended it." Saying goodbye will be hard, but knowing what comes next makes that farewell feel less like an ending and more like the continuation of something truly remarkable. A new chapter in the story that George has always been telling.
I'm Graham Somerville. While I will feel nostalgic as the cranes arrive and the wrecking balls swing, I don't think I'll miss the Royal George as a building. What is a theater after all but a shell, an empty space? What I will miss, and do miss, are the ephemeral moments of transcendent beauty that I've had the great good fortune to witness in that building. As a 20-something actor, new to the business, I got to be on that stage with Goldie Semple, an actress I had fallen in love with across the footlights years before my voice broke, with David Sherman, with Jenny Phipps, with Bunny Barons, with Bob Benson, and to have the singular Neil Monroe directing it all. All of those artists are dead now. They were giants, in Bob Benson's case, rather literally. There's an old Bruce Cockburn lyric, "A song when it's over is no song at all." A play only exists in the moment of its playing. It is about the moment. It celebrates the momentary nature of life. It exults in its own passage. What lives on are the memories of laughter and grief and compassion and enlightenment and delight. But there's another legacy, that of the lessons learned by apprentices watching masters of their craft dancing their way towards the sublime. So while the rest for them is silence, in this way they live on, immortal as a forest in spite of the fact that each tree must one day fall. Every one of us that has been a part of the story of the George, whether it's been by welcoming the audience, raising the curtain, trimming the hems, or setting the curls, speaking the speech or calling the cues, we have all received from those who preceded us, and offer our contributions in turn to those who will succeed. This is the true ghost of the George, a spirit which will go on to grace the new building, as it once did the old.
This episode was narrated by Neil Barclay. It was written by Cosette Derome, with contributions from Melissa Novecosky, Neil Barclay, and me, Kelly Wong. Sound design, editing, and production by Kelly Wong. A huge thank you to everyone who shared their stories for this project. We'll see you back here in the spring.
Let's get this show on the